Mark A. Altman, Daren Dochterman, Ashley Edward Miller. 3 fans who became professionals and then became Treksperts. Inglorious Treksperts. Listen wherever you find podcasts or go to trekspertsplus.com.
They're here. Yes, indeed. Your favorite 4:30 movie hosts are all back with an all-new season of curating fantasy theme weeks on the 4:30 Movie Podcast. Join Daren Dochterman, Ashley Edward Miller, STEVEN MELCHING, and myself, Mark A. Altman, as we bring you the latest and sometimes not so greatest in movie curation. It's the 4:30 movie. It's fun. It's informative. It's awesome. And until then, Eyewitness News starts now. Hey, this is Mark A. Altman, one of the co-hosts of Inglorious Treksperts. And if you're a Trek fan, you owe it to yourself to pick up the 50-year mission, the complete, uncensored oral history of Star Trek. It's available wherever you buy books, digital or audio. And speaking of books, check out my new book about the making of John Wick. They shouldn't have killed his dog. Also available wherever you buy your books. You see a pattern happening here? Well, what are you waiting for? Get on it.
Well, here we go. Deck 78.
Welcome to Deck 78 and other galactic funk. That's going to be the name of the podcast from now on. Daren gave me the idea. Deck 78 and other galactic funk. Since this is our Trek adjacent podcast, so it's like it's the same way the Miko album was Star Wars, but it had Star Trek and it had all this other galactic. It had other
galactic funk.
Yeah. So there you go. But today on Deck 78, we're breaking out the ambrosia, some very rare ambrosia, to celebrate Galactica in 1978.
The ABC Sunday Night Movie presents the most spectacular space adventure ever filmed. Transport yourself in time to a star system far beyond our own galaxy.
Core systems transferring control to probe craft. Launch when ready.
Battlestar Galactica, a saga of a star world. I got him on the left. I got him on the right.
That is precision flying.
For 1,000 years, a race of alien machines has been bent on destruction of the human race.
They hate us with every fiber of their existence.
And now their evil plans may become reality.
It's dangerous around here.
Why do those people want to hurt us? What do we do to them?
It's not what we did to them. It's what they fear we could do.
Join the last remnants of the human race in their quest for a new world.
13th colony. This other world. Where is it and what is it called?
Earth. And be there for the ultimate confrontation.
Enemy closing 30 microns.
But if you're wrong...
25 microns.
I'm not wrong.
15 microns.
Cylons lured me into their deception once.
Closing in 5 microns.
Never again.
Prepare yourself for Battlestar Galactica.
And to do that, aside from your usual Decksperts, Daren Dochterman, Ashley Edward Miller, Mark Altman, we have a very special guest. We have STEVEN MELCHING joining us from the bridge of the Battlestar Galactica.
Greetings. It's almost as if it's 4:30. Yeah, but it's not.
What time is it? It's 4:30. Oh wait,
4:30
none of you would
somewhere.
get that except for Ashley. That's bubble guppies.
It's time for lunch.
What time is it? It's time for lunch. I mean, my kids haven't been that young, but it never goes away. You always say it sticks with you. It does, just like Battlestar Galactica, 1978.
Bubble guppies of science fiction.
A lot of people may say, why aren't you talking about Ron Moore's show? Great show.
You know why? Because it's the same amount of time between Ron Moore's show and us now as it was when we were first watching Ron Moore's show and the original show.
Is that true? Did you do the math on that?
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. And it's as long since Pearl Harbor. Never mind. So,
which is
wow,
actually kind of true. So
that is crazy.
Which means it's time for another reboot.
Well, that's the rumor, isn't it? That they had Sam Esmail involved at Universal.
It's going to cost you
Peacock.
something extra too.
But I think that given the cost and how everyone's retrenching on spending money, I don't think we're going to see a Galactica TV series anytime soon.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, no. Or a movie, to be honest. I mean, they've tried to develop that movie now for 20 years, and it hasn't happened.
But the thing is, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure we'll get into this, but Galactica just isn't a movie. I mean, the concept, to me, it's just not a movie. It's a series.
I don't know. Universal, could be saying, what do we have like Star Wars? Well, you got Galactica.
I don't think they're saying that now.
Yeah, that maybe so. But it's funny because let me just poll you guys. Are you all fans of Galactica 78?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, me too. And it's funny because when my book came out, So Say We All, you can count how many times I mentioned it during this episode. I was amazed by, thank you, Steve. I was amazed by how many times fans of the new Galactica were like, I don't want to read this book because there's the original Galactica in it. How many people from the original Galactica said, I'm not going to get this book because the new Galactica is in it. I don't get that at all because I love both of them.
You got chocolate.
I think they're both great.
Yeah, absolutely. They both have their charms and their virtues. I'll happily watch both of them.
And they're both great in totally different ways. But today we're talking about 78 Galactica because this is a show, much like Rodney Dangerfield, doesn't get a lot of respect. It's arguable whether it does deserve respect. I think it does. Because I think in many ways it was super groundbreaking. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it got pigeonholed as a ripoff of Star Wars did it no favors. But this is a really groundbreaking show. I want to talk to each of you about what your experience was seeing Galactica for the first time. So, Steve, you're the guest. What was your experience seeing Galactica 78 for the first time and your response to it, if you recall?
Well, I mean, I'm sure my experience is very similar to yours. I was a huge fan of Star Wars, of course. It kind of taken over my world in the previous year, 77, going into September 78, when Galactica premiered on television. And I was there, parked in front of the TV for the 3-hour premiere. And I mean, I loved it, and I watched every episode every week. And, even at the age of 10 and 11, I could tell, it's a little goofy, maybe a little cheap. I mean, but I loved it because I was getting it every week. And, I collected the trading cards. I got the toys. It was a weekly fix.
It's hard to understand now because, of course, Star Wars was movies back then, and the thought of having Star Wars every week was inconceivable. Now people take that for granted. They got Star Trek every week. Well, in some cases, Star Wars every week, all this stuff. So it's different than back then when it was like, this was just even crazy that they could attempt something like this. Darren, what was your experience seeing Galactica for the first time?
Of course, I was on the East Coast, so mine was delayed by the broadcast from President Carter. But I watched it from the beginning. I got the soundtrack right away. And it was actually inspiration for me to start trying to transcribe music. And I transcribed the opening of Galactica on paper. for the first time, and trying to the whole exploration.
Okay, Steve, give us the narration. What was it?
There are those who believe that life here began out there.
With tribes of humans who may have been the forefathers of the Egyptians, or the Mayans, or the Toltecs,
or the Mayans.
That's the short.
Or the lost cities of Lemuria and Atlantis.
Oh, you're doing a lot.
That's right.
Like that there.
Some believe that there may yet be brothers of man
who even now fight to survive somewhere beyond the heavens. Ashley?
Wrong show.
No, I've never seen it.
Okay, what about you?
Thankfully, my broadcast wasn't delayed. We were living in Hawaii, so we got it live. We didn't get the interruption.
But the funny thing is, I mean, I enjoyed it, and I didn't really see, other than the shots kind of looking like Star Wars. I thought it was visually different enough for me, and I thought it was exciting. I love the Cylons, man. Cylons became the one doodle on all of my math homework for years after that, between Cylons and Darth Vader. And look, it was just enough to sort of fuel the enjoyment of a youngster. I was 11, and it was just right. And TV was a vast wasteland of crap. So this was a better version of crap for us.
I just want to interject, since I'm not the artist here, that my math notes didn't have Cylons on it. I had just replaced the Enterprise fighting Klingon D7 with the Galactica fighting a Cylon base star, which was soon to be replaced with the Enterprise refit fighting against the Klingon Katinga ship. But Cylons were way beyond my ability. Okay, Ashley, what about you?
I too had to sit and wait and wait and wait.
In Casablanca?
Yeah, exactly, for that stupid speech. And wait for Battlestar Galactica to finally premiere. I was so excited for it. And then I had to sit and understand, at the time I was maybe 6 years old.
Yeah.
So convincing my parents that I should be allowed to wait was in itself an adventure, but somehow I prevailed.
So you feigned instant interest in the president's speech to let them.
Exactly. All I heard was blah, 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 blah. And in fact, my twins are doing this project on presidents, on influential leaders. And for some reason, Griffin drew the Jimmy Carter card. So we have to talk about all the things that Jimmy Carter did. And so I told him that he needs to include in his presentation that Jimmy Carter preempted the premiere of Battlestar Galactica.
I know I was upset with him about the Camp David peace accords. It's like, how could that have, be nearly as important as this war between the Cylons and the Colonials?
Exactly. And it just wasn't, as it turned out. But, I loved it. I loved every frame of it. And what, number one, it appealed to the little Star Trek fan in me. I mean, I guess like somewhat to this Star Wars fan, but as Darren pointed out, I didn't really sense the Star Wars in it. To me, it felt like its own thing. If anything, it felt more like Star Trek to me. In many respects, except what was different about it was creating its own world with its own lingo, and its own cool designs. I didn't draw the Galactica. I drew Vipers. I loved drawing Vipers, man. I thought that they were the bee's knees. even though they were called the Vipers. And I loved Starbuck, even though the way that he processes his grief in a very interesting way by going to a casino and celebrating. But I dug Starbuck.
That's how I do it.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, it's kind of true and sad. It's like that William H. Macy movie, The Cooler. Only different. Now, see, who doesn't want to cross over The Cooler with Battlestar Galactica? I loved it, man. I never missed an episode. I loved it so much. I even watched the show that came after it that I'm sure we'll talk about, but maybe not today.
Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. It's so interesting. You talk about how it evokes Star Trek for you, because according to Glenn Larson, Galactica had its roots in a show that he came up with in the late 60s called Adam's Ark. And this was a show about the world was going to be destroyed. And so this industrialist, I guess like an Elon Musk type, put together the best and the brightest on Earth and would take a space looking for a new home in space.
I love the premise. Like this Howard Hughes figure in Vegas builds this fancy, crazy new hotel, invites all these world famous scientists and leaders to some kind of conference, and while they're inside, the hotel blasts off into space.
Yeah, that's and he would use this to say he would use this to say this is why it wasn't ripped off from Star Wars, that this was basically an inverted version of Adam's Ark. Now, whether that's true or not, because, Glenn Larson had a reputation for ripping off hit movies and turning them into TV series. BJ and the Bear was the Clint Eastwood orangutan movies. Allie Smith and Jones was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. What were some of the others? There are a whole bunch of Larson shows that are taken from
BJ and the Bear was originally Fellatio and the Wombat.
And Harlan Ellison famously called him Glenn Larceny, right, which was a great nickname. And it's interesting because Larson, one of his first gigs was on It Takes a Thief, where he worked under Gene Coon, right. And he considered Gene Coon a mentor. Now, Larson, also one of the things that he would do is he'd be involved in the pilot and then leave, but just keep collecting money. So like Quincy, he was involved in the pilot. Magnum, a lot of these shows, but Galactica was one of the few exceptions where he was involved from the beginning to the end. It was really his passion. I think late in life, if you asked him what his favorite show was, he said, I had more successful shows, but Battlestar Galactica was the one that meant the most to me, partially because he was a Mormon with like 8 kids, I think. Mm-hmm. And he took a lot of the tenets of his Mormon faith and sort of sci-fi'd them up to put them in Galactica. The Council of the Ten, Cobol, a lot of these things were kind of based in his Mormon ideology or religion. So, it gave it an interesting grounding for the story he was telling. But I think the reason people confuse it with Star Wars more than anything is John Dykstra did the effects on the first 3 two-parters. And so he's using literally the same facility and the same equipment and mostly the same people that did Star Wars. Yeah. And Ralph McQuarrie did the concept art. So
and Joe Johnston.
And Joe Johnston, right. Of course. He designed the Cylons, right?
And of course, Andy Probert designed the Cylons.
Oh, right. Yeah. So it evokes the aesthetic of Star Wars, even if plot-wise, it's not, because it's Pearl Harbor in space. That's not Star Wars. Right. Star Wars is not Pearl Harbor in space. And if anything, he rips off Bonanza because it's about a family, and then he hires Lorne Greene to be basically the Cartwrights and Apollo, and Marin Jensen is Athena.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, now.
No, Larson uses a very different type of storytelling. Star Wars is very, mythic storytelling, and Galactica is very grounded, family style episodic storytelling. It's on a much smaller scale, dealing with, more recognizable or relatable human emotions or situations.
But not human words. Centon, Micron.
There was only one Star Wars movie at the time. So, what Galactica was doing that was different was it was creating this story that seemed to have life beyond the frame and life beyond the end of each episode. And that even though the episodes were effectively standalone, the truth is they were shockingly not standalone for a show of the time. And at that point, we had no idea what The Empire Strikes Back was going to look like, or what a continuation of Star Wars was going to look like. At that point, Star Wars was Star Wars.
It was a self-contained story. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yep.
Yeah. Or that Empire Strikes Back would look like Gun on Ice Planet Zero.
That's
exactly.
Who's ripping off who? Who's ripping who?
Exactly.
Exactly. Now that's a good point. It's interesting too that, the other reason this happened is because Star Wars was successful, which led Universal and ABC to want to make it.
Of course.
And originally it was just going to be because the 3-hour led to the second two-part, Lost Planet of the Gods. And originally ABC was just going to do it as a series of like miniseries because they had a lot of success with Roots and with Rich Man, Poor Man and Masada and all these things. But then sort of during production, they decide, oh no, we want to do this as a weekly series. And that's where it really suffered because the 1 hour episodes for the most part are not nearly as good or as ambitious as the two-parters. Plus you also have Dykstra leaving after doing Living Legend because he did the pilot, Lost Planet of the Gods, and then Living Legend. And then you have all this effects from
Heartland,
which are not nearly as good as, and partially that's time and budget as what John Dykstra was doing, which is really spectacular. And of course, if you like what John Dykstra did, you're going to continue to enjoy it because they recycled those effects 9 billion times throughout the series.
They were terrific. I mean, they still hold up today. They were more sophisticated than most of the effects in Star Wars. The Star Wars sort of served as R&D in a way for Galactica. They learned from their, not mistakes, but they learned from that Star Wars experience on how to do something even more spectacular.
And it's funny because the guys doing the effects were not told that this was going to be released in theaters in Europe and
eventually the U.S.
Well, eventually the U.S. So they didn't know. So a lot of the things they really hated seeing up on the screen, on the projection screen, because they didn't look up to the correct standard because they were shooting for TV. So it was it's a very interesting situation with the Dykstra and then ILM because Lucas basically abandoned them after Star Wars was done. And told them to fend for themselves. And I believe Dykstra asked Lucas if they could, do some other work, and he said sure. And then when he found out what they were doing, that's when the lawsuit came. But look, all these other guys that were working for ILM needed to work, and Dykstra was doing his due diligence to bring in work for everybody. And it's only because of that there were people around who could then go up to Maritn and start on Empire Strikes Back. So,
well, and remember, the lawsuit was from Fox, not from Lucasfilm.
Right.
There is some question as to how much Lucas really had to do with that lawsuit. And I mean, I know he resented. I mean, Mark Hamill told me, which I love. He said they used to call it Battlestar Copycatia.
Right.
But, it's funny, but it's not necessarily true.
It's not true. No.
Yeah. But it's really interesting because, Steve, you mentioned sometimes it could look cheap. And I think it was the most expensive TV movie ever made at the time. And even on the poster, when they released it theatrically, it said made at a staggering cost of, I think it was 13 million or maybe 7 million. But it was a lot of money at the time. Yeah. And the episodes were the first show to cost ever over $1 million an episode, and which was, and you could see it on screen for a while.
Right. Well, what I mean by cheap is, the obvious recycling of visual effects shots, which they just did not have the time and budget to do.
Right. Sure.
Effects for every episode, and the use of backlot sets, which Western towns and whatnot, which. I totally understand. You were talking earlier about that transition from the miniseries model to the series model. They had to really scramble And I don't think they had a lot of time. Like, geez, now we got to do, 20 more episodes or, 15 more episodes beyond these miniseries. Like, well, let's do Shane. Let's do.
Well, that's such a good point.
And like,
let's do Towering Inferno.
Yeah. What do we have? What sets can we use that are there that we don't have to design and build, and we can just.
That's such a great point. But you come out of whatever you think of the pilot, it works more than it doesn't. Yeah, as goofy as the stuff is on Caprica, and all of a sudden they've gone through this Holocaust, this genocide, and they're talking about taking the singing girls out on the circuit and starting a casino. It's silly. And then Lost Planet of the Gods, they're in this void, and they find this planet that's identical to Egypt, and there's a lot of goofy stuff, but it is really interesting and kind of intriguing and mysterious and all this stuff. And you haven't seen the last of Baltar, all this stuff. But then, your first 1 hour is this huge Shane ripoff, The Lost Warrior, which they shoot in the Western town at Universal, and they put a couple of blinking lights on the doors. And it's like,
aluminum cowboy hats, my favorite.
Yeah. Not a cowboy hat.
And it ends with a shootout between Apollo and the Cylon, who's called Red Eye because of his pulsating light. But it's so interesting because you're right, Steve. This show, I don't think had any show at that point had ever taken up 8 sound stages on the Universal line. It's a very uninteresting Universal Studios tour. Here they're filming Galactica. Over here they're filming Galactica. Here they're filming Galactica. And the bridge alone cost $850,000. They built over the tank because they had so much electronics beneath it from Tektronix, which they got to credit every episode. And I love that bridge. That may be one of my favorite bridge sets of all time.
Set.
Probably my favorite bridge set next to the original Enterprise. And it's remarkable, but they stayed on the lot. And at one point, they had to give up some of the stages to other productions. So they got stages nearby, and that was the only other place they filmed. Occasionally, they go to Fox Ranch or something like that. But they pretty much were on the lot the whole time. So like many other productions of the day at the Universal factory, you'd recognize, especially now, once you've been to the Universal tour enough times, you work there, you're like, oh, I recognize that. It's pretty amazing. I mean, the Viper, the launch bay, I think was on the old Phantom of the Opera stage, which is pretty cool. Like there were curtains, like there were those, black duvetine, and then behind it you could see the old stage from the old Phantom of the Opera. So I mean, there's so much history there, and Galactica was part of that history. I mean, you had like Ben Coleman, who was shooting it, who was an old DP from starting the Silence, I think. You have like Ray Milland and Lou Ayres and all these like legendary people. So it is that sort of connective tissue between the past and the future. That's why I think it resonates so much for us, because it was like that end of an era that we were alive just for the tail end of the golden age of Hollywood, and then the beginning of the new Hollywood, which was Star Wars, and we were at like this nexus of it all, and Galactica represents that.
It's like being surrounded by joy.
Yeah, Fred Astaire shows up in an episode, or the Tin Man,
Ray Bolger and Bobby Van. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I was ever more excited about a TV show, The Cowardly Lion, more excited about a TV show before or since than the debut. And back then, how did you find out something was happening? You either saw it in Starlog or TV Guide. I remember those Frank Frazetta ads in TV Guide. I'm like, oh my God, this looks amazing.
Yeah. And of course, seeing the previews on ABC itself. In the weeks beforehand, I think they were saying that a saga for television, a space saga, and it was really, the anticipation was huge.
Do you guys have like favorite episodes that, like Steve? What you just did a marathon? You just binged it. What in retrospect, like what stands out for you?
I always, as going back to when I was a kid, one of my favorites was always the Gun on Ice Planet Zero 2-parter. I thought that was a really compelling story, and I like that they were on this ice. This was before
when it was called The Dirty Dozen too.
Yeah, right. But they had clones, they had Cylons, they had this super laser that could blast the Galactica out of the sky.
That could ravish all.
Yeah,
yes.
the ravish all pulsar.
Ravish all pulsar. I don't know. I just found that particular story really compelling. And of course, the living legend.
This time, the Galactica hasn't a chance. Concentrate our fighters on the Galactica's landing base. Her warriors won't be able to refuel, reload, or land.
The Galactica is reporting heavy damage to her landing base.
Right. Bring her around 60 degrees. We're going in. Burn, Galactica. You're finished, Adama. Now, I don't want to miss a moment of the last Battlestar's destruction.
I really think you should look at the other Battlestar.
What are you babbling about, Up? It's impossible. Turn, you fools, turn! He's coming right for us!
And now, the exciting conclusion of Living Legend.
Is, I don't know, probably the parts 1 and 2, probably the best story of the whole thing. But I think most of them have their virtues, but those two are my favorites.
What about you, Ashley? What are your favorites?
I definitely would have said Living Legend, but I am very partial to War of the Gods.
No! I forbid it! Sheba, come to me.
Don't listen to him, Sheba. Now turn around and look at what we found.
Don't be deceived. You're mine. Come. Be with me.
Sheba.
Do not touch her. She is mine. She has given herself to me freely.
Now listen to me. Listen to me. Come out of it. Hear me.
Let her go. I command it.
You command no one who does not willingly give you dominion. You have no power over me.
You know who I am.
Yes, I finally know. Sheba, think back to the ancient records. The names Mephistopheles, Diaboles, the Prince of Darkness.
I will give you one more chance before I strike her down. Death to her, Apollo. May her soul curse you through eternity.
Apollo! Apollo! My God. He's dead. You killed him!
Because there is just something extremely compelling about Count Dibley and that whole story, and that just as I like to say, Patrick Macney has such tremendous charisma.
Yeah,
and usually when Lorne Greene walks, onto a set, when he walks into a scene, he owns it. Right? The man has that thing. He can fill a room with his personality. But when he had scenes with Dibley, Adama felt like he was up against somebody who was a worthy opponent.
Yep.
Somebody who was dangerous, and also somebody who hinted at other things. Mm-hmm. A much larger story. And that's what I found so compelling. And I always wanted to see a follow-up. I always wanted to see what happened next or what that meant. And I've always felt like there is, and they never got to it in the new Galactica, but I've always felt like there is just the barest hint of a connection between the original series and the reboot that comes from him and the things
what was
that he was
so
saying.
so cool about War of the Gods is it was about angels and demons, which is something that Star Trek would, let's say, would never do. Yeah, there was magic of Megas 2 and stuff, but it's not a Star Trekian conceit. Star Trek was not like a spiritual show. So that was so interesting. And Ron Moore did say the one thing he wished he could have gotten to in his Galactica that he didn't get to do was Count Iblis. I asked him about that, and obviously they did Living Legend and they did it really well. But War of the Gods was something he said they just never were luck. What about you, Darren? What was your favorites?
I love all of those too, but I also really like, what is it, the Young Warriors?
Young Lords.
Young Lords. Yes. Where they make up this song about a plan to rescue Bruce Glover, which is always a nice thing to do. But there's just something that's fun about that, and I really like seeing Starbuck fending for himself without having to deal with the crap on the Galactica.
And you like Audrey Landers also.
Well, yeah, of course. Why not? But
how cool was it to see the Cylons like wading through marsh, like in a real environment?
Yeah. Well, for everyone but the production, the line producer, because they had two horrible incidents on Young Lords. One where it was dark, and one of them was on the stairs of the castle and tripped.
Yeah,
and they fell like dominoes, and they all went down the stairs. But then the director made them march through the swamp, through the water, and it destroyed. And these costumes were super expensive. It destroyed all the costumes.
Yeah.
Because they got water and gunk and all this stuff.
What most people don't realize is those costumes were extremely fragile. They were just vacuum formed plastic that were vacuum metallized, and they're extremely delicate. And the tiniest scratch rips off the chrome. And a friend of mine has an original Cylon costume, and it's so light and so crappy. That it's amazing that they look so good on TV, and they do. But and again, extremely expensive to remake and certainly to repair.
It's funny. Go ahead. Well, I was going to say, in relation to what you said, when I was talking to Rod Holcomb, because he had shot an episode of Agent X for me, I used to talk about Galactica all the time because he worked on Galactica, and he would tell me it was so difficult to shoot because of reflections.
Yeah.
And you see the camera. So it was really tough to shoot the Cylons because it was reflecting the lights and it was reflecting the camera. And
you'd see the whole crew in a star filter.
So it was interesting. Now it's funny, you guys all had different favorites. I have to agree with all of you. Everything you've mentioned are my favorite episodes. So I'm not going to repeat Living Legend, War of the Worlds, all this, War of the Worlds, War of the Gods. I'm going to add on, and I'm going to say I love the fact that towards the end of the show, because the Galactica was being chased the whole time, which I know David Gerald criticizes it. They're always on the run. That's not an exciting show. That's not heroic because you're which is an interesting point. But I love Hand of God.
Yeah. Commander, long-range scan indicates our squadrons are engaged.
Give it to me here.
Yes, sir.
They're heavily outnumbered.
They can hold their own. All we need now is to... There she is, Tommy.
The base star.
Yes. Now let's pray that Apollo and Starbuck have knocked out our scanners. Battle stations.
Yes, sir. Battle stations. Seal all compartments. I don't think she scanned us, sir.
They might just have done it, Ty. Stand by to fire. Fire!
What happened? Aft laser turrets report an attacking Battlestar. Fire aft mega lasers.
Where they decide they're going to take on I'm tired of running. So am I. And they go up against the base stars, which is definitely the best 1 hour episode.
Yep.
Plus the idea of the getting the moon landing, which like, wow, that was like blew people's minds, at the time. It was like blew my mind. And then even something like the quantum leap precursor, Experiment in Terror, where and it basically is Quantum Leap. Donald Belisario admits it. He wrote it. Where Apollo pretends to be somebody else to deal with this, to stop a nuclear war on Terra. But at the end, the Galactica, because this is a case where the Galactica is superior to the technology, but like basically stops the war. They just like use their lasers and they just like wipe out in a nuclear exchange. And like they get to be badass for a change, as opposed to like, we're running away from the Cylons. And I thought that was really, really cool. And that also is, I think, one of John Delancey's first screen appearances.
Yes.
He plays like a guard in that.
Yeah. Another favorite of mine is sort of the opposite of all of that. It's not a grand, expansive episode. It's a bottle episode, and that's Fire in Space. I always really like that episode where the Cylons do this all-out attack, kamikaze attack on the Galactica. Adama ends up fighting for his life in the life bay, and Boomer and Boxy are trapped on the recreation deck, and there's fire is raging out of control, and it's threatening the whole ship, and Starbuck and Apollo have to go EVA, and other Vipers are in space trying to shoot fire retardant into the launch bay. It's really clever, fun, Towering Inferno episode.
Yeah. Well, they even used footage from Towering Inferno or Earthquake. I forget which one, but they used a bunch of footage for when the Galactica was on fire.
They had that shot of Shelley Winters sort of floating part of the fleet.
And, I love that the MacGuffin is the Muffy treats. So dessert saves their lives. I love that. The mushy treats. Yeah. So it's good. The food comes to their rescue. I like that.
Now, we have to mention that Muffet the Daggett was played by a chimpanzee.
Was it the same chimp who played Bear?
I don't think so.
Damn it.
No,
I don't
it wasn't.
think so.
It was Evie.
Yeah, it's just so amazing that, first of all, you'd have the idea to do this. Second of all, you'd actually go through with it. I mean, what kind of mind comes up with this idea and then does it?
There's a couple examples of that in this show. There's one in Galactica 1980 that blows my mind that I'm sure we'll get to.
Not if we're lucky. But yeah, Boone Nair was the animal wrangler, and they had the main chimp was Evie, but they had some other chimps too. But apparently she was very sweet, and the actors.
Well, it would have to be put in the costume all day. Yeah. I mean,
last I heard, she was still alive.
Well, good for you.
Doing interviews. She's like signing autographs. We're going to see her at GalaxyCon.
Yeah,
she's so wearing a ratty old Muffet costume.
I'd love to convince Mike at GalaxyCon to do some kind of Galactica reunion. I know they've done them from time to time, and obviously, Richard Hatch has passed away and a lot. But Dirk Benedict, Lawrence Spang, Terry Carter. Terry Carter brought such gravitas as Colonel Ty. Yeah. And it's interesting because he almost lost that role because he broke his leg skateboarding or rollerblading with his daughter right before they start production. He didn't want to tell him because he didn't want to lose the role. So he shows up in this cast. They're like, what the but he
was so great. When Commander Adama sees these uniforms, he's gonna go crazy.
He's so funny.
And
I spent a little time with him.
And of course, we spent, a good dinner with Herb Jefferson Jr. And his tales of Boomer. And he's just
Boomer.
hey Boomer. Yeah. Okay, Boomer.
Okay, Boomer.
But he's just so much fun and enthusiastic and loves the fans and loves the fact that he did Galactica. Very enjoyable.
I used to love to get at Comic-Con. Richard Hatch would always do these. They were like motivational speeches. Like he would have these 1 hour slots, and there usually weren't that many people because in the late 90s, Galactica wasn't really on anyone's radar. Even leading up to the Ron Moore series, and he was just such a compelling, inspiring, passionate speaker. I just loved going and sitting in the back and watching him work the crowd.
Yeah, agreed. It's a great loss.
Yeah.
That was such a special night, that dinner we did at Morton's at WonderCon, because we just done a panel with Alan Levy, who directed the pilot and Gun on Ice Planet Zero. And then I think Rod Holcomb was there, and Herb Jefferson Jr. and Terry McDonald, who was the story editor, and Dave Rogers, who's just a Galactica super fan.
Right.
And
he brought Galactica to the office.
Yeah, he was the one who brought Galactica to the office. All that Galactica stuff came from Dave Rogers. He talks about it on his Treksperts episode that he was on.
Yes.
May the Space Force be with you. So if you're interested in that, you should check it out. But that was such a great night. I mean, to be able to give back to these people who gave us so much as kids, it was, and they were so touched by the whole thing. And people loved that panel. I mean, that was a great panel full of great stories, and it was a really fun night. But I was going to say that years ago, I was at Star Trek convention. I was a guest at, and we were staying at a bed and breakfast. That's where they put us up. I'd never do that again. But in Rochester, New York, and Terry Carter and Grace Lee Whitney were two of the other guests. So I spent a lot of time with Terry and Grace, and Terry was just the sweetest man. He was just so great. And so I got to know him a little that weekend, and I just thought the world of him. And it was great because I used to love him in the show, because Lauren Green was not like Kirk. He had gravitas, but he wasn't like the guy you wanted to hang out with, or, just you want to send down to the planet. But Terry Carter he brought a humanity to that role that was so great.
Absolutely. And he's great on the show, because he is sort of he's the link to the upper echelon, right? He lives with the grunts and cohorts with the command, and it's a fun character, first of all, and he's really good in it.
That was the Star Trek convention I was at, where my brother came. And Will Wheaton came up to try and interview him at the booth. And Ira was listening to a baseball game on the radio. And Will Wheaton's, "Can I ask you a few questions?" He goes, "No." And Will Wheaton's like, "Well, I don't know if you know who I am. I'm Will Wheaton from Star Trek Next Generation." He goes, "I don't care."
Wow.
And he's like, "Well, I'm really curious about why you're here. You don't seem that interested." He said, "Go away."
Wow.
So you see, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But, Dirk Benedict to me was just amazing in that show. He was the rogue. He was the Han Solo type character, but I think he was more than that. I mean, he was just a very interesting character, and Dirk was great. And of course, he played the same role right after the show was canceled in the A-Team, as Spaceman.
Basically.
Yeah, he said he patterned he drew inspiration from the character of Maverick for Starbuck, as this sort of, scoundrel, this kind of gambler who would rather...
That's Brett Maverick, not Tom Cruise Maverick.
Right, yes.
Although both of them are great pilots.
I suppose so.
Oh my God.
But in the sense that he was more of a charmer, like to talk his way out of a fight than actually have to fight somebody.
Yes. Yeah, right. Exactly.
And he has an averse reaction to steam, apparently.
Yeah. And he loves coffee.
Yeah, you remember
fumarellos. Is that what they call them? Fumarellos?
Yes, cigars. Yeah. Remember Herb told us that story about, the reason they're all on towels in that first scene in Galactica. And he has a towel around his neck, and they're all, Jolly is in a, towel, and everybody's not dressed, is because they hadn't finished the costumes yet.
Oh my God.
That's how tough.
No, that's producing.
How tough they were, how behind they were, and how challenging it was. I mean, and if you talk to any of these people who worked on this or the subsequent Galactica 1980, they were always so behind that they were filming multiple episodes at once. Sometimes they would put them in the Viper and give them scripts for 3 episodes to do all their dialogue, because, and there were times where they would send stuff to the satellite Sunday afternoon in order to make the broadcast.
Wow.
They were just finishing it. This was all finished on film. It was all posted. There's no digital post pipeline. It was all analog, and so they cut it really close. And one of the things I think that hurt Galactica was that it was constantly preempted by other things. And I think part of that was to give them more time to finish the episodes.
I think we ought to talk a little bit about the amazing music by Stu Phillips.
Oh, yes.
One thing that stuck with me about the show from the beginning was the amazing music. And, I was already a huge John Williams fan and Jerry Goldsmith. And here was this person, Stu Phillips, that I'd never heard of before. If I had been a little more informed, I would know. But
you hadn't seen Beyond the Valley of the Dolls?
I hadn't seen any of that at 11 years old.
I hadn't seen any of them.
But the music is so good and so evocative, yet different than anything we'd heard before. I mean, it's still in the sort of the romantic vein, but all the themes are great. The orchestrations are beautiful. And our mutual friend, Mojo, and I got to have lunch with Stu Phillips a few years ago and talk to him about all of this stuff. And Stu Phillips is was an amazing guy, and still is. And he didn't live far from the place we had lunch, so we got to go visit him at home and in his little writing cubicle at the back of his house, and he played Galactica music for us on the piano.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we actually were trying to find the music for that post credits intro into the show, where you see Boomer and Jolly looking
and the
up
guest
in the sky.
stars and everything.
Yeah, and it mentions all the guest stars because that wasn't on. Exactly. Yeah. It was not on the soundtrack that had been released because they couldn't find it at the time. But we were able to find the cue on his printed sheet music and find the name for it so that they could search for it and find it to include on the next release. Wow. So it was just a wonderful afternoon with Stu Phillips, and we were kissing his ass all through it. But
I think the
so
music,
much fun.
Yeah. I think the music, there's no greater score, I think, than the original Star Trek episodes, but Battlestar Galactica is close. And about 10 or 15 years ago, Entrada put all the music out on CD, and it's fantastic. I mean, his scores for Buck Rogers is fun, and I like it, but the Galactica music is like, Star Wars quality. I mean, it's really phenomenal.
And it just sticks with you, like,
well, and thematic. So, like, every time you see the silent bass start, dun 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 dun, and then that great music for the light ship in War of the Gods.
Yeah, it's scary and beautiful.
Choir and everything.
Yeah. Stu Phillips did an incredible job, and the Los Angeles Philharmonic.
Yes.
I remember getting the soundtrack on the LP and loving it, and just hoping one day they would put out the TV show. And the TV show was put out as a bootleg, the Stu Phillips anthology. Right. But many years later, Entrada put all the episodes out, and it's freaking awesome.
I would say if there's one Galactica related thing that was a letdown, it was the merchandising. I always felt that the toy line was lackluster. The action figures, what there were of them, they were okay, but there weren't enough of them. They never made a Starbuck or a Boomer.
Although I loved my Cylon.
Yeah, the Cylon was great. Although I didn't like the molded legs, so you couldn't, and the gold Cylon was great, and the little ships with the firing missiles.
Be careful, you'll poke your eye out.
Which I still have.
Remember, it's because of Battlestar Galactica that Boba Fett didn't have a missile launcher.
Yeah.
Because at the time that they were developing the Boba Fett figure with a launching missile, apparently some kid hurt himself with one of the missiles from a Cylon Raider.
And this is why we can't have nice things.
This is why we can't have nice things.
Well, they hate humans.
Look,
with every fabric of their being.
Especially human children.
I'm sure that the kid who did it was very nice, but he couldn't have been very bright. That's all I'm saying.
He probably deserved it.
I hope he didn't die, but I also kind of hope he did. I'm not saying that.
You're going to get an enraged tweet from a guy with an eye patch. And he'll be like,
you don't know what I went through.
Much like Rafe Needleman, that would be a podcast miracle.
Rafe Needleman is one thing, but kid who got his eye put out by a Cylon Raider?
It could have been Rafe Needleman. That's all I'm saying.
Rafe. Just ask Rafe. Are you the kid? Also, how do you feel about Life cereal? Just ask.
But that little Viper toy was pretty great. And the Cylon Raider that had the wings that opened up to reveal the missiles was pretty great. The Stellar Probe and the other one, the other two toys were okay. I mean, obviously they didn't appear in the show anywhere, but I was always disappointed. I had the little Viper launch bay thing that was like a rubber band contraption that would shoot a foam rubber Viper out of a launch bay. But other than that, the soundtrack album was great. I love the Wonder Bread cards. Daren's got a beautiful studio
holding
replica.
Up a casting of an original Cylon Raider.
That's so nice.
Down on the beach, missing a tail.
I loved the Raiders so much.
Yeah.
And
the Los Angeles Raiders?
You're a funny one. The MPC model kit of the Cylon Raider was the most beautiful model kit I had ever seen.
I thought the Viper was great. I love building that.
I wasn't a big fan of the Viper because it did remind me too much of the X-Wing. And I'm not a big fan of the X-Wing, to be honest. I like the bad guys' ships better. I like the bad guys' ships. And so
fascinating.
The Raiders were so cool and I loved them. I would always take my model of the Raider and I would do that move as it moves away and does the spin down. And I actually put lights in it so the engines lit up and the lasers lit up. And it was I went all out for it. I was planning on making a movie with it. And of course, I had no friends who could help me make a movie. So I was out of luck.
Had no friends.
But it all went into the great chasm of potentialist art that I've contributed to.
That is so cool. And of course, there were huge clunkers like Greetings from Earth, which is the aforementioned episode you mentioned with Ray Bolger and Bobby Van. I mean, we thought, it's a two-parter. It's got to be good. No, not so much.
No.
But it did introduce the Eastern Alliance.
Zone, I'll tell you that much.
It's no neutral zone.
I mean, but even one that's not really remembered much, Take the Celestra, is kind of an interesting episode because it gets into the politics in the fleet and the civilian versus the military, like those themes that Ron Moore explored so brilliantly in his reboot series. The roots are in an episode like that.
And if you're a fan.
I'm sorry, as George Lucas let us know, kids love political stories.
Yeah, they do.
Well, if you're a fan of Dr. Piper, and who isn't from Star Trek, the second pilot, then Paul Fix is back as the captain of the Celestra. The Fix is in as captain of the Celestra. What was his name again? He was Adama's mentor, but he resented him.
He was a resentor.
Yeah, I forget what his name was, but he ran things with an iron fist on that ship. I think that episode is let down by its production values. You can tell it's late in the series and it's very blocky and it's a lot of reused sets. And, at the beginning when they're giving Ty giving the captain his award, you can tell it's a soundstage. It's just like they don't hide it at all. It's like, there's the soundstage, there's the ceiling, there's the wall, and they just put like a little stage in the middle of the set. And
isn't that the one where they actually had like a little, a band playing the theme as if it were the national anthem of
they're playing the Galactica theme as though it's like the military honors for which they did in Ron Moore's too, which I always loved when they did that. Bear McCreary did that.
One of my favorite moments.
But Take the Celestra, and it's another old flame of Starbucks, Aurora, played by Anna Alicia. It's interesting. It's an interesting episode. I agree. But And then there's just some awful ones like the one with the Bores, and Cyrus Bellaby, Brett Summers from Match Game.
Right.
It's just
the Magnificent Warriors.
Ooh, man.
Adama.
Come out and play. Wait, no, that's
She was like the precursor to Luoxana Troy. Let's do it. Okay, ready for the holiday special? Here we go. 10 best Galactica characters, starting with 10. Beryllian Noman at 10. Okay, number 9. Number 9.
God.
Come on, who's number 9?
Number 9 is Cyrus Bellaby.
No, she's not in the top 10. Come on.
Sure he is.
No, Lloyd Bachner from the Eastern Alliance.
No, I hate the freaking Eastern Alliance. It's the stupidest thing ever.
Okay.
I'm your white knight.
Okay, come on, number 9. Okay, it's Green Bean. Yeah. Ed Beagley Jr.
Oh my
Lieutenant
God!
Green Bean.
As what was his name? Come on,
Green Bean. Yeah,
Green Bean.
Green Bean. Mm-hmm. Okay, number 8.
Sheba.
No, Sarah Rush, the Rigel. She's the one who goes launch all Vipers. Okay, we're gonna get to Sheba, right?
Okay.
So, number 7.
Number 7 is the Chief Ovion.
It can't be the singers. It's love.
No, they're higher up.
Okay. Well, because because you got to have countably in the top 5.
Yeah.
You got to have Adama.
Don't tell me who we got to have.
Starbuck, Sheba.
Yeah.
Right?
What about Serena? What about Serena?
Oh, Serena. Yeah.
And Apollo.
You got to have Jane
maybe?
Seymour.
Apollo, maybe?
I guess.
Starbuck, Imperious Leader.
Yes.
Cora, the computer.
Baltar.
Oh, yeah. How can you got Baltar?
Baltar.
Right?
You got to have Baltar.
Oh, my God. This got to be a holiday special. We need more time for this.
Wait. You guys, you've listed all of these names, and I haven't heard Janeway pass any of the rights. What's going on here?
You're funny.
What about the Daggett? You got to have the Daggett.
No, you don't.
Muffy.
No, you don't.
No, you don't.
You got to have Commander Kane.
And
you got to have Commander Kane.
And you don't have to have Boxy.
No, you don't.
Oh. Yeah.
No, you don't need that Boxy.
Wesley Crusher.
But you need Athena. You need Athena because we were all like 10 years old at the time.
I didn't like Boxy when I was on, but I think it was more like I was jealous that this kid like got to hang out on those sets and like be in that show.
I didn't like that kid.
And you were rooting against him in Neverending Story.
Yeah. I didn't like that he was the impetus for all these stories. Like he hit out on the shuttle. So he goes down to the Gun on Ice Planet Zero because he was hiding on the shuttle. It's like
Muffy wants to see snow.
Yeah.
Show Muffy snow.
And then fire in the, he's in the center of the action again and fire in space. It's like, I don't like
it. They kind of wrote him out of the show by the second half though.
And Athena also.
I loved Athena.
Yeah. Well, who didn't?
Athena and Serena were my two go-to babes.
Apparently, Don Henley didn't love her enough. He didn't marry her. Too soon.
Yeah.
But what else? So I mean, it's just like, look at the way we talk about the show. It's almost like Inglorious Galactica spurts. It's crazy. I don't know. But there's a legacy here because the show, despite being very high in the ratings, I mean, at the time it was like one of the highest rated shows ever to be canceled because it was so expensive.
It was just too damn expensive.
Expensive. And then if you believe it, the story may be apocryphal. It went through kind of the same thing as Batman, where they changed their mind and we're going to bring it back, but they'd already struck the sets by then.
Yeah. I tend to believe those stories, but it just proves what idiots that studios are.
So instead, they greenlight Galactica 1980.
Sunday on Galactica 1980, Cylons destroy the fleet's food supply ship.
The loss of the aggro ship can be crippling to us.
Their only hope for survival is to find a place on Earth and start a new colony.
Please, Lord. Please send somebody to help my dad.
Perhaps we can be of help.
And they help each other.
I think we better deal with that situation.
But discover they're the targets of hostile neighbors, forcing them to use superpowers to stay on Earth. Galactica 1980.
Tomorrow at 7, 6 Central and Mountain on ABC.
And that was that. Everyone lived happily ever after at the end.
Except, there was.
Which, on its face, I don't think that the bare premise for Galactica 1980 isn't bad. I mean, the idea that the Galactica, after all of its journeys, after, a couple decades in space, couple of, dozen yarns in space, actually finds Earth. Like, great, all our problems are solved. But, oh no, it's this primitive backwards world of 1980, and we're be helpless against the Cylons. So we have to embark on a two-pronged strategy. We'll lead the Cylon fleet away from Earth while simultaneously trying to surreptitiously advance the technology of Earth so that they can defend themselves.
They have the help of the brilliant Dr. Z.
It is a pretty good premise. Unfortunately, it kind of leaned into all the crap that didn't work. Weirdly, it depended on the fact that we just got finished shitting on Boxy, and now Boxy's back and he's kind of the lead on the show. There were two things I really.
Well, and then there's like a dozen Boxies in that show.
Yeah, but what I mean is literally, Boxy is the lead on the show. The dude from whatchamacallit?
Barry Van Dyke.
Yeah.
Not Barry Van Dyke.
The other guy.
The other one.
Kent McCord.
Kent McCord.
Adam 12.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kent McCord. Yeah.
And I don't know. I like two things about Galactica 1980 other than the premise, and then it's whatever. I loved it, and I have no excuse for this, but I just did. So whatevs. The night the Cylons landed.
With Wolfman Jack.
And they're on the Universal lot and it's silent. I thought that was kind of awesome. And I love the return of Starbuck.
Yes. Well, yeah, but that was originally an original Galactica script. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it feels like an original Galactica script.
Is that true, or is that an apocryphal story?
I think it is true. I think they thought they were getting canceled, and I don't know if Larson wrote that specifically or if it was an original Galactica story. But at that point, the writing was on the wall, and he said, rather than doing a Galactica 80 episode, let's do an episode of the original. It's kind of like what happened at Enterprise with the finale. Where they did an episode of Next Generation, except in this case, it was a great idea to do this because the episodes they rejected, they had a couple in development. The day that, Earthquake was one where an earthquake machine could create earthquakes. Another one they were in the middle of filming on the day they were canceled was called The Day They Kidnapped Cleopatra, where Xavier goes back in time and kidnaps Cleopatra and brings her back to the future. And they were 3 days into filming when the show was canceled. And it's so funny because Robin Douglas told me this great story who played, the investigator. She was the reporter, Jamie Summers or Jamie, whatever she was. And she says, so she's doing a scene and she just keeps screwing it up. And she was feeling worse and worse. And finally, she just screws up another take. She starts, and they say, okay, enough, we're done. Show's canceled. And she starts crying. And they're all thinking, because she thought they were canceling the show because she couldn't get the lines right.
Oh, no.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's amazing.
They didn't tell her for a few days, did they?
They had to live with the weight of that.
Yeah.
And they had already recast Xavier in that episode.
Oh, yeah. Jeremy Brett replaced Richard Lynch. But I guess Richard Lynch was going to come back. He'd been filming something else. Maybe it was Sword and Sorcerer. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And no, it wasn't. But he was going to come back, I guess, and replace Jeremy Brent. Everything about this, it was so ill-advised. I mean, a lot of it was a bunch of Glenn Larson's friends. He knew it wasn't going to last, so he put his kids in it again. Yeah. And it's ridiculous because you think, oh my God, this whole series, they've been looking for Earth. And then I remember you saw the commercial, right? And it's like, oh my God, they're going to find Earth. And they had all that footage from Earthquake of the Cylon Raiders attacking Hollywood and blowing up the Cinerama Dome. And you're like, oh my God, this show is going to be the greatest thing ever. Right. And
switch.
And it starts. Finally, we found Earth. Right. They're in orbit.
Yeah.
What?
We're here.
And then it's like,
everybody.
And then you're watching, you're like thinking, okay, well, that's odd. That's a weird choice. I mean, this is 11-year-old.
What happened to the good parts?
And then all of a sudden, Dr. Z, who's this doctor? What? It's a fucking kid from the Brady Bunch, cousin Oliver, and he's a super smart scientist who's telling Adama what to do. This is terrible. And then as if it couldn't get any worse, suddenly, this is what could happen on Earth. if the Cylons were to arrive here. And it's like, no, this is the worst. I mean, I knew as a kid, this is the worst thing ever. And it's like, I don't want to see a bunch of kids with superpowers. I mean, what is this?
It could have been V, but no.
Then they get to go back in time, because now they can travel through time.
Yeah, to time.
World War II to help the Nazis develop their rocket program and use a bunch of stock footage from World War II movies.
And you never stop to think, well, if they could go back. Right, exactly. If they can go back in time, why don't they just go back and stop the Cylons from attacking the fleet?
Yeah,
because then we'd have no show.
I know, but it's so stupid that this became a time travel show.
Yeah,
I mean, and to do right next to they arrived at Earth and it's Adam and Eve. The dumbest trope of sci-fi is World War II. We're going to change World War II so the Nazis win. It's
when they should have them arrive at Earth and it's all apes.
And the Cylons blew it up.
Yeah.
But to maybe understand a little bit where they're coming from creatively, they were slotted in that quote unquote educational hour on early Sunday evening. So they had to have a certain amount of educational content combined with less violent content.
The only thing it taught me was to not watch the show anymore.
No, see, Steve's making a great point.
Content, I would have watched Voyagers, and
there was a broadcast censor, Susan Futterman, and apparently you could only have so many acts of violence during the family hour, which was 7 to 8. And if a blaster got shot at a tree, that counts as an act of violence. Then you could only hit the Cylons a certain amount of times. And they would have to be an educational component. So for instance, in the pilot where Robert Reed plays the scientist, he has to explain to them how a car works. And he says, well, the internal combustion engine works like this. And it's like stopping to do an education. It's like a sequest. We talked about how they'd have Dr. Ballard come and explain something. And so every episode, they would come in and explain some scientific principle so that
on the 12 colonies, gravity was much heavier. So here on Earth, there's a different gravity. So therefore we can jump 30 feet in the air here.
Yep, exactly. I mean, it's so bad. And then, you get to, the Bad News Bears episode, Spaceball, where they have to play, a Little League game to win, to save the camp. And then there's the one Space Croppers with the evil agricultural guys, the Monsanto guys and they have to stop them from poisoning the lake, right? I mean, this is the
singing
worst.
Their song while leaping around, planting seeds. I mean, it's this riveting science fiction television.
Yeah, but you're right. The only one that's watchable is that Night the Cylons Landed two-parter, but it's the humanoid Cylons, which is what inspired Ron Moore to do his Galactica. No. But humanoid Cylons, because it was cheaper, and they had a mix in. So the thing is, they have their Cylons, and it's Halloween, so everyone thinks the Cylons are people in costumes. I mean, it's so ridiculous, and they're stopped by a microwave oven.
Well, it was the guest star.
I found amusing.
William Daniels, and I learned from reading "So Say We All" by Mark A. Altman and Edward Gross that. The running gag of the meatballs, the mention of meatballs, that Sarah Futterman was convinced it was they were trying to sneak a sex jokes into the script, so they kept doubling down and adding more meatball references.
Yeah, because they show up. The guy shows up in William Daniels' house. Here's your favorite plate of meatballs. And they change it to wieners or something.
When I was rewatching it recently, it's they kept bringing up these fucking meatballs, in the scene, he's going to be making his famous meatballs. Oh, I hope we don't have to have those famous meatballs. Why do they keep talking about the damn meatballs?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, God. It's so bad. My favorite story, Steve, in that book is when Barry Van Dyke talks about the scene where they get the money. And so he goes out of the bank, and the director's Vince Edwards is saying, so you're going to run across the street and you're with this bag of money and get to your motorcycle. And he's like, well, you're going to stop traffic. He says, no, we don't have permits, but it's okay. Don't worry. You won't get hit. So he's running across the street, and all from the bank with the money,
with
all
bags of fake money,
all from around the corner. These police cars come up, screaming, they jump out with their guns and say, "Put the money down!" and they think he's robbing the bank.
And this is Dick Van Dyke's son, by the way.
Yeah,
Barry Van Dyke is Dick, Hollywood legend Dick Van Dyke. Now, the other crazy thing that I alluded to earlier about, maybe even crazier than the idea of casting a monkey to play a space dog, is attaching a fake motorcycle to the skid of a helicopter and putting a stuntman on it with a camera and flying it up and away from the freeway. Like, when I'm watching the show, like, how do they do that? Is that on a crane? What's happening here? Like, I can't believe they actually did that.
And proved a huge inspiration for the movie Megaforce. But, it's funny because, nobody comes back other than Herb Jefferson Jr. and Lorne Greene, who's the one, he's supposed to be Moses, who's never going to make it to the promised land. So he's the one guy they do bring back. And it's so weird because one of the...
But he has a beard.
Yeah, but he has a beard, so you don't recognize him. So one of the producers says it's an amazing story. They go to this baseball game, Glenn Larson, Lorne Greene, and Dirk Benedict and him. And they said Lorne Greene hated baseball, had no idea who Tommy Lasorda is or anything else, but, he's just a good guy. And so he came with them. So these kids come up for his autograph. And, he's always happy to sign autographs because he's a very avuncular guy. And he goes, "Oh, so Bonanza?" They're like, "No." He goes, "Galactica?" And he goes, "No." They go, "No." He's like, "So what do you know me from?" They go, "The Alpo dog commercials."
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
I guess they said his avuncular demeanor suddenly changed.
That's his legacy. The Alpo dog.
Alpo pitchman. Yeah, exactly.
By all accounts, though, everyone just loved Lorne. Like, he just sounded like the consummate professional.
No, they were love Lorne.
Yeah. Well, he's Canadian, so of course
you're just looking around and seeing actors and saying you love them, right? Is that? I love Lorne.
But that show was so misguided and so bad, and just it's just a bad idea.
Let's forget about it. Let's not talk about it.
Bad idea, Ripley.
Although,
bad idea.
Ashley, but I will say this one thing. Because, as a writer, they said the way Larson used to write was either, he had a typewriter in his limousine. He had like the stretch limousine, but also he had this beautiful house in Malibu. And so he had a typewriter that looked out at the Pacific Ocean. So when he sat down to write a script, he wouldn't outline, he wouldn't do anything. He'd sit in front of the typewriter, get to page 50, 60. And if the story wasn't over, to be continued. Okay, it's done.
And they said when he would do that, he wouldn't even look down at what he was typing. He would just stare out over at the water and touch type these scripts. Like,
I
crazy.
cannot even imagine.
That explains a lot, though.
Yeah. That's why there's so many two-parters.
Yeah. Well, he had this whole staff, but then he insisted on writing them all. But I think that's because he knew it wasn't going to last long. And, that's generally, he wanted to make sure he got as much credit and residuals as possible.
And
not
maybe
that
a little bit
it.
that it was his passion project.
It was his
maybe
passion
he really
project.
liked it, too.
He did. He was the most defensive about it. We tried. He said, we really tried with that show. And given what they were up against, it's understandable. And Return of Starbuck really is fun. And by the way, for those of you who are Galactica fans or listen to this episode and never seen it, the way to watch it is there's this absolutely stunning Blu-ray set that Universal put out, which has all the episodes of the original Galactica, all the episodes of Galactica 1980, and it has them both the original broadcast version and then matted to give it a theatrical version. And it is so loaded up with deleted scenes. The only thing it's missing is the night they kidnapped Cleopatra. But there's tons of outtakes and bloopers and substantial deleted scenes from the original Galactica.
I think it also includes the sort of the theatrical cut of the pilot and the 3-hour individual episodes for syndication.
Which isn't dramatically different, but Baltar doesn't die in the TV version, and it doesn't have that scene. The theatrical version doesn't have the scene where Athena is hiding behind the locker when she's getting undressed, and Starbuck comes in. So
did you guys see it in Sense-Around? And when was it, 79? I think they released it in theaters.
I did not.
I never went to see it in a theater because I
didn't see it.
Seen it.
Yeah, I didn't see it until we showed it at the Cinematheque. For the anniversary.
I loved it. I went and saw it in the theater when it was. I also saw the pilot for Buck Rogers in the 25th century.
Yeah, so did I. But that'll be our next episode. We'll come back. We'll talk about Buck Rogers another time because that requires the same deep dive we did today as we go far beyond the stars we know.
We also need to talk about the Ron Moore reboot. Because that deserves at least the amount of time that the original does, because there's some amazing things in that as well. Not, it's not all great, but there are some very interesting turns that were put into that show.
Yeah, and we absolutely should do an episode. Yeah. And I was surprised that we weren't doing the Q&A with Katie Sackhoff at GalaxyCon. And then I thought, should we say something? And then I realized, we got enough panels. We don't need to do any more panels. But I would like to do the next time, either she's there or somebody from the Ron Moore Galactica. I'd love to do that because I do love that show. Yeah. And we have great stories about that, don't we, guys? Remember we watched the miniseries and hated it? We watched
the miniseries first and hated it.
And then came back and watched 33. Which was like, holy crap.
They changed our minds. They said, what the heck is going on here? This is
complete 180.
Yeah. It's the oddest thing I've ever experienced about a show. Absolutely.
Yeah. Because we hated the miniseries. Yep. And from 33 on, we were completely all in on Galactica.
Picard.
Yeah, it's kind of like Picard, where we hated. Did I say that? The first 2 seasons. And then third season, we're just cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs over it. So, anyway. But this was great because there may yet be brothers of man who even now fight to survive. Okay, so what's the closing? Let's do the closing.
From a Cylon tyranny.
The last Battlestar Galactica
leads a
ragtag fugitive fleet on a lonely quest. A shining planet known as Earth. This has been Deck 78. See you next time. And until then, fire the rockets.
Deck 78 is an exclusive podcast from Treksperts Plus.